Good afternoon, everybody. This is Pastor Brandon with the weekly update this week. Do you take a regular Sabbath? Because God instituted a Sabbath for our benefit. In the creation story, God created for 6 days, and on the seventh day, He rested. And that is the principle we have when it comes to the Sabbath. And the Sabbath is something that many of us know about, many of us talk about, and many of us have some concept. But the Sabbath in Jesus' time was far different than our concept of a Sabbath now. Because Orthodox Jews did and still do take the Sabbath seriously. That's sundown on Friday to Saturday. And we get that from passages in the Old Testament. But just because we follow Jesus and have the New Testament doesn't mean we should completely get rid of a Sabbath. But a Sabbath is for our benefit. You know, Jesus in Luke chapter 6 deals with the Sabbath because by that point, the Sabbath had already transformed and kind of mutated into something other than God intended it to be. Because Jesus and his disciples were traveling, the disciples became hungry, and so they started plucking some heads of grain to eat to satisfy their hunger. Well, this angered the Pharisees because between the Old Testament and the New Testament, they had added rules and regulations and ideas to the Sabbath. They weren't taken from Scripture, they were just developed and extrapolated over time so that the Sabbath, instead of being a blessing, became a burden. So even though the disciples didn't do anything wrong, there was a provision in Levitical law for travelers to pluck heads of grain. They were just prohibited from using a sickle. The disciples did not use a sickle, yet the Pharisees still found fault with them. And to us, it may seem odd. It may seem like our neighbor is wandering in and taking mangoes from our mango tree, or taking key limes if we have a key lime tree. But this wasn't the case because there was a provision for that. They were just plucking some heads of grain and eating them. So the Pharisees didn't have an issue with what the disciples did, but with when the disciples did. So the Pharisees questioned Jesus because as the teacher, he was responsible for his followers. And his answer and example is a very interesting passage from 1 Samuel. Because Jesus uses David eating the showbread as an example of breaking what is lawful for other priorities. Because though the passage in 1 Samuel 21 is filled with David being deceitful, David sinning, the priest Ahimelech being deceived and giving David the bread that was supposed to be reserved for priests, it really shows us something. And it shows us something that can be summed up in the parallel passages to Luke chapter 6 and Matthew and Mark, where Jesus says, I desire compassion and not sacrifice. Because that is actually a quote from Hosea 6, verse 6, that I desire compassion, not a sacrifice. Because ultimately, this concept of the Sabbath had mutated from a blessing to a burden, and human compassion and mercy can take precedent over a religious tradition. Now, this does not give us cause to sin because the disciples did not sin in this case, and Jesus is not condoning sin in this case. But Jesus is clarifying what the Sabbath really means, and we know that Jesus has the authority to clarify what the Sabbath really means because of Luke chapter 6, verse 5. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, meaning that Jesus, who is the Son of Man, who is fully God, gets to define what the Sabbath is because God instituted the Sabbath. And then we see another account in Luke 6 verses 6 through 10 or 11 maybe, where Jesus heals on the Sabbath. And the Pharisees don't like this either, and they get mad at him for helping and healing on the Sabbath, kind of begging the question, well, is compassion lawful on the Sabbath? So both the passage with the grain and the passage healing the man who had a withered hand show us and teach us that we should take a Sabbath, but that we should value compassion and mercy over a religious tradition. So, for example, you're getting ready for church. Wonderful, good job. I'm so glad you're getting ready for church with your family. You're going out the door and your neighbor's having a medical emergency. Do you leave them there suffering because I gotta get to church, see ya? No, you help your neighbor. You show compassion and mercy and assist them in what they need. That is more important than simply attending a worship gathering on time. Because though it is good for us to go to church, it is good for us to gather with believers. Scripture tells us not to neglect the gathering of believers. If somebody is in dire need and needs help, please help them. Show them that mercy and compassion. Instead of becoming rigid, instead of becoming like the Pharisees who were so focused with the letter of the law, they lost sight of the intent. They lost sight of what God put in place for our benefit. So let me encourage you to one, take a Sabbath. If you don't already, take a day where you commit to not doing work. I know that's very hard in today's society, but a day that you commit to not doing work and that you commit to spending time with God. Now, the most obvious and clear and easy example is for Sunday, the day that we attend church, to be that day. Because if you work Monday through Friday, you have 2 days of a weekend. Hey, use Sunday as your Sabbath, where you gather with other believers, where you have a Bible study, where you rest and you are restored and you spend time with God. Because the Sabbath is not just for rest, it's for rest and restoration and drawing near to our Creator. And second, look for ways to show compassion, like Jesus showed by healing the man on the Sabbath. Look for ways to show compassion, especially on the Sabbath. One of the most compassionate things we can do is invite people to church. So if you have friends, family, or neighbors that you may see on a Sunday, maybe they're getting ready to go out fishing or getting ready to do something fun with their family, you can invite them to church, because that is a wonderful act of mercy, showing them the good news of Jesus Christ. And again, we have some invite cards to help you with that. This Sunday is our last Sunday to pass these out. We have these invite cards that I encourage you to use them to support and to help you as you share the gospel. Palm Sunday is this Sunday and Resurrection Sunday is next Sunday. Invite people to church. Show them compassion. Show them mercy. And show them the good news of Jesus Christ. And finally, remember, Jesus gets to define what the Sabbath is because He is Lord. Is Jesus the Lord of your life? Is Jesus the Lord of your time? And is Jesus the Lord of your priorities? So I just wanted to give you that message or that recap of what I spoke on and preached this past Sunday, because it's important for us to remember to take a Sabbath or a rest, for us to remember that it is for our benefit, and for us to remember to show compassion, not to miss the point like the Pharisees, because they are so easy to pick on when we often get things wrong ourselves. So we have a full calendar of activities because it's Easter season. What better time for us to have a full calendar of activities? You know, this past Sunday was a wonderful Sunday, a blessing for all of us. Our children's choir performed in the morning service. If you missed that, go check last Sunday's service on our live stream on Facebook or this channel right here on YouTube. You will be encouraged as the kids were dancing to and singing along with songs that talk about Jesus, that talk about the Bible. It makes me think of those wonderful Vacation Bible School songs we all grew up singing and going to be part of, which we have Vacation Bible School in a couple months. Don't forget about that. But the children's choir did a wonderful, wonderful job. And then this Wednesday, we have our regular prayer service. Next Wednesday, April the 16th, we actually have a special service. We have a Passion Week service Many churches do a Good Friday service, so we are going to incorporate some of those elements in our Wednesday night service. That is Wednesday night at 6 p.m. on April the 16th. We are going to partake in the Lord's Supper together, right around the time where the Last Supper would have happened on what would be Thursday of Passion Week. We are going to learn about the sacrifice of Jesus and the crucifixion and the time leading up to the cross. And then before that, this coming Sunday, Palm Sunday, our Easter choir is going to sing, and they are going to sing wonderful songs of the faith. You know some of them. And it's such an encouragement to have a choir, to be able to join our voices together. You know, as somebody who is finishing a doctorate degree in worship, I have such a passion and a heart for worship. I have such a passion and a heart for musical worship. And one of the best things we do as churches is to have choirs, is to join and have more people, more voices raising their praises to the Lord of hosts, the God who deserves all glory and honor and praise. So this coming Sunday, Palm Sunday, we have our Easter choir singing, and next Sunday on Easter, the choir will also be singing. They're just doing a slightly amended service. Speaking of Easter, our entire Easter schedule is gonna be like we normally do it, 6:30 a.m., bright and early, right out front in the church parking lot. We have our sunrise service. So it's at 6:30. We have chairs set out, and there's gonna be hymns that we sing together. The handbells are gonna play, and then I'm just gonna give you a message of encouragement, of the hope of the resurrection that we have because of Jesus Christ. I pray that you will start getting ready now to wake up early on Easter Sunday, April the 20th, for that sunrise service. And let me see if I can entice you further to attend our Easter activities. Because right after the sunrise service at 8 a.m., we're having an Easter breakfast. And you know what we're having at our Easter breakfast? Bacon. Lots of bacon. So wake up early, come for the Resurrection Sunday celebration, and stay and come for some bacon and eggs and pancakes. We have a whole breakfast spread for you guys. It's free. It's at 8 in the morning, April the 20th. I hope you'll be there. I will definitely be there getting some good food. And then finally, we conclude the day's activities with our Easter celebration service. We're gonna have our handbells, our choir, and celebrate the hope of the resurrection. So I encourage you that you put your faith into action this week. You invite people to church, especially for Easter. Let me encourage you to take a Sabbath rest, to show compassion on the Sabbath, and to tell others about Jesus. May the Lord bless you, may He keep you, and make His face shine upon you. Have a great week.